picture this, right? You sit down, you read a script, and right from the very first page, the narrative just entirely immerses you in this stark, really disorienting atmosphere.
Oh, yeah. It really grabs you.
It does. It reads exactly like an avant-garde psychological thriller. I mean, the setting is this dilapidated, crumbling old house that is, barely holding itself together.
Right.
And then suddenly, without any warning at all, a horde of total strangers just breaches the threshold. But they aren't there to smash the place up or steal a television or anything normal.
No, of course not. That would be too straightforward.
Exactly. Instead, they aggressively unpack these absolute mountains of cabbage and spices. And they just begin this incredibly intensive, overwhelming process of making kimchi right in the middle of the living room.
Which is just such a specific and wild image.
It is. And before you can even process the total absurdity of that, the scene violently cuts. And it cuts to this horrific medical procedure. I mean, a surgical transplant of horse anatomy performed entirely without anesthesia.
Yeah, that part is really difficult to even read.
It's brutal. And then the climax of this script, it's this desperate, agonizing sprint for survival. You're running away from the very people you just sacrificed literally everything to save, all while under this torrential, stinging rain of tiny arrows.
Right.
I mean, honestly, you would think we were looking at a storyboard for the next big A24 indie horror masterpiece or something.
You really would. The cinematic quality of the narrative is just undeniable.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, the reality of the source material is far more intimate and, frankly, it's far more unsettling.
Yeah, definitely.
Because we are not analyzing a piece of fiction written for the screen today. We're dissecting a rigorously documented, incredibly vivid stress dream.
Which is exactly why we are dedicating this entire deep dive to unpacking it. We're really going to decode this bizarre, highly intense nocturnal movie.
It's quite a mission.
It is. Because the objective here, right, it isn't just to flip through some dusty dream dictionary and simply declare that, a horse symbolizes strength or a house means family.
Oh, yeah. We want to avoid those old cliches.
Exactly. We are aiming much higher. We really want to understand the underlying mechanisms, like the actual neurological and psychological translations that occur when the human brain converts our modern waking anxieties into these terrifying, high-definition, nocturnal simulations.
Yeah, and to do that, we really have to discard the outdated notion that dreams are just, random neurological static, or that they're purely the result of eating heavy food too close to bedtime.
Right, the old spicy food excuse.
Exactly. The contemporary psychological framework, detailed in our source material, presents a much more active, purposeful model. I mean, this specific type of intense nocturnal experience, it's actually classified as a threat simulation dream.
A threat simulation. Okay, let's really get into the mechanics of that, because the text argues that a highly narrative dream, one that's just packed with visceral physical sensations and constant scene changes, that is the brain actively running a protocol.
Yes.
It's not passive theater, it's a test ground.
That's a great way to put it. The evolutionary psychology behind the threat simulation theory, it essentially posits that our brains develop this capacity for highly immersive dreaming as a core survival mechanism.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So think about your waking hours. You are constantly bombarded with stimuli. You encounter overt anxieties, sure, but you also absorb these fleeting micro-stressors.
Right, the little things.
Exactly. Suppressed emotional reactions, subtle physiological tension. Stuff that your conscious mind simply doesn't have the bandwidth to process in real time.
Because, you'd never get anything done if you pause to process every single stressful micro-interaction.
Exactly. Your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical executive part of your brain, it basically pushes all of that background noise aside so you can answer emails, commute, and just function in society.
But the unconscious mind, it acts as a sponge, right? Just quietly collecting all those fragmented data points.
It acts as a massive archive, yes. And when you enter REM sleep, the neurochemical environment of the brain shifts entirely. The logical prefrontal cortex basically goes dark.
So the adult in the room leaves.
Exactly. And while that happens, the limbic system, which controls emotion and memory, it just flares into high gear. So the brain takes all those unresolved anxieties and weaves them into a cohesive, albeit highly symbolic, narrative.
Wow.
It is literally running a simulation to practice how to cope with perceived threats. By creating this safe internal environment, the brain kind of forces the organism to test its emotional, psychological, and even virtual motor responses to extreme pressure.
That is wild. It's essentially a danger room. Or, to use a more modern equivalent, it's a high-tech flight simulator for the psyche.
I love that analogy.
Like the brain straps you into the pilot's seat and just throws the absolute worst-case scenarios right at the windshield. Engine failure, severe turbulence, complete system overrides.
Right, right.
All just to force you to practice pulling the nose up when the alarms are blaring.
The neurobiology supports that analogy completely, actually. During REM sleep, the brain induces a state of muscle atonia, which is essentially paralyzing your physical body.
Wait, really? Just so you don't act it out?
Precisely so you don't physically act out the intense life-or-death maneuvers you're practicing in the simulator. The brain fires the motor commands, the simulated environment reacts, and the emotional centers register the fear and adrenaline as entirely real.
Okay, but let's unpack this a bit, because if this is just a simulator, there feels like a flaw in that logic to me.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, if I step out of a literal flight simulator, the moment I unbuckle, I know I'm on solid ground.
Right.
My heart rate drops, the adrenaline dissipates, and I go get a coffee. But the source text specifically notes that when the dreamer woke up from this bizarre ordeal, the heavy, lingering feeling of dread and sadness and terror, it lasted for hours.
Yes, it did.
And in some cases, these emotional hangovers ruin the entire day. So if the brain is just running a practice drill, why does the emotional toll bleed so heavily into reality?
That's the core question, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that seems less like evolutionary problem solving and more like the brain just masochistically torturing itself.
It looks that way from the outside, sure. But the persistence of that emotional hangover is actually the most critical piece of data the simulation produces.
Really? How so?
Well, the dream is not a prophecy, and it isn't designed to magically solve the problem while you sleep. It's a phenomenological manifestation of current, unresolved allostatic load.
Allostatic load. Remind me,
It's the cumulative wear and tear on the body from chronic stress. So the reason that dark, heavy feeling lingers in the chest upon waking is because the underlying waking world problem remains entirely unsolved.
Oh, so the simulator ran the data, but the pilot still crashed?
Or, maybe more accurately, the pilot's still flying a burning plane in their waking life.
Ew.
Yeah. The lingering emotion like the cortisol and adrenaline that haven't been downregulated, it is the biological equivalent of a dashboard warning light that simply cannot be muted.
Wow.
It is the unconscious mind forcing the physiological state of alarm to persist into the waking hours. It's essentially demanding, like, hey, we ran the simulation, we experienced the catastrophic trajectory of our current path, and we failed to mitigate it. You must change your waking behavior.
So the alarm bell just refuses to be ignored.
Yeah, exactly.
That is so intense. And I guess for any simulation to effectively test the pilot, it requires a highly specific environment, right? The context where the threat materializes kind of dictates the nature of the test.
Absolutely. The setting is everything.
Which brings us right to the very foundation of this dream, the dilapidated old folk house.
Right. The setting establishes the baseline psychological state of the dreamer. The narrative opens in this crumbling structure, where the dreamer is just attempting to live a very modest, quiet existence.
Yeah, and according to the psychoanalytic frameworks referenced in our analysis, architecture in dreams carries immense weight. I mean, a house isn't just a shelter from the rain.
No, not at all.
It is the structural representation of the ego.
Yeah, Gaston Bachelard explored this extensively in his work on the poetics of space. A house in a dream almost universally symbolizes one's psychological foundation, the boundary of the self, and, like, the inner sanctuary of the mind. And the specific condition of the house is a direct readout of the dreamer's perceived mental architecture.
So the fact that this structure is described as dilapidated and barely holding together.
It reflects a waking reality where the individual feels their psychological foundation is severely compromised. They're operating on a deficit, just barely maintaining their structural integrity against the pressures of everyday life.
They aren't living in a reinforced bunker. They are sheltering in a shack that a strong gust of wind could flatten.
Exactly.
But, and this seems crucial to the narrative, it is still their shack.
Right.
It is the last remaining territory over which they have any sovereignty.
Yes. It is a highly fragile safe haven. And the primary function of a safe haven is to maintain a boundary between the self and the unpredictable chaos of the external world.
And that boundary is exactly what gets obliterated when the avant-garde elements of the dream violently intrude.
The invasion.
Yeah. This massive horde of strangers swarms into this fragile house. And they don't engage in typical home invasion behavior, which is so weird. They immediately set up a massive production line to make kimchi right in the middle of the living space.
It sounds almost comical at first, right?
It does.
Yeah.
Like, why kimchi?
But the specificity of the kimchi production is actually a brilliant, highly localized translation of complex social anxieties. It seems absurd on the surface, but the psychological decoding of that action reveals a really profound violation.
Let's look at the mechanics of making kimchi for a second. I mean, it requires enormous amounts of physical space.
Yes, tons of bowls and ingredients everywhere.
Exactly. And it involves pungent, overpowering smells of fermentation, garlic, and spice. It is this intense, culturally specific process that fundamentally alters the atmosphere of wherever it is happening.
And the analysis highlights that this imagery has absolutely nothing to do with food.
Right.
It is the materialization of the terror of having your personal culture, your private operational rules, and your individual values aggressively overwritten by an external force.
Oh, wow.
The brain has basically taken broad, diffuse social anxieties like perhaps the feeling of being displaced in one's community, or the shifting of workplace expectations, or just the relentless encroachment of societal demands.
It localized them.
Exactly. It localized them directly into the center of the dreamer's psychological sanctuary.
It's the ultimate loss of autonomy. Like, imagine you have a private office. It might be messy, the chair might squeak, and I guess that represents the dilapidated state of the ego. But it is your managed chaos.
Right. It's yours.
And then a group of people walk in without knocking, ignore you completely, repaint the walls, throw out your filing system, and just set up an entirely different business operation right on top of your desk.
You have the perfect parallel.
They aren't attacking you physically, but they are simply erasing your existence from the space through their overwhelming presence.
That captures the exact psychological mechanism at play. It is the collapse of personal sovereignty through the sheer, unconsented imposition of someone else's reality.
Right.
The dreamer's internal environment is totally hijacked.
And the natural instinct, when a boundary is breached, is to retreat, right? To find a deeper, more fortified internal perimeter, which is exactly what we see. The dreamer flees the living room and locks themselves inside the toilet,
Yes, the toilet.
which universally is the final frontier of privacy.
Hmm.
Anthropologically speaking, the bathroom is like the one space in modern human habitation where the social contract mandates absolute isolation. It is the room of vulnerability.
It is the ultimate safe room for the psyche. And the source material emphasizes that retreating to the toilet represents a desperate attempt to salvage just a microscopic sliver of autonomy.
Right.
It is the mind essentially pleading, take the living room, take the social spaces, but just leave me this 1 square meter of existence where I do not have to perform for the outside world.
But the simulation is designed to test the absolute worst-case scenario. So the social contract is violently broken. The invaders breach the locked door and physically drag the dreamer out of that final sanctuary.
The extraction from the toilet signifies a total, catastrophic failure of all psychological boundaries. The dreamer is stripped of the orienting reflex of safety.
It's terrifying.
It is. It's the somatic manifestation of a waking reality, where the individual feels there is absolutely nowhere left to hide and nowhere left to rest. The external demands have penetrated the absolute core of the individual's defense mechanisms.
If you are listening to this right now, consider how this maps onto your modern waking experience. You don't need to dream about strangers making fermented cabbage to recognize the feeling.
No, the feeling is very universal.
Think about sitting on your couch on a Sunday afternoon. That is your designated safe room. And suddenly your phone starts lighting up with urgent Slack messages from a boss who just doesn't respect weekends.
Right, the modern invader.
Exactly. At the same time, push notifications are delivering doom-laden news headlines, and maybe family members are texting demands for your emotional labor. Your boundaries are being systematically breached digitally and emotionally.
Yes.
The outside world is reorganizing its priorities in your living room, dragging you out of your downtime. That right there, that is the kimchi invasion.
Absolutely. The ubiquity of digital connectivity has fundamentally compromised our psychological architecture. The threat simulation is merely visualizing what it feels like to live in a state of constant, uninvited access.
And the source text outlines a really terrifying progression here, because once the environmental and spatial boundaries are entirely breached, the threat has nowhere to go but inward.
Yes, the body.
Right. When the house is lost, the conflict moves to the most intimate, inescapable territory possible, the physical body. So let's get into this, because we are moving into the most visceral, intense portion of the dream.
It gets quite dark.
It does. The dreamer, having lost their home and all sense of safety, is thrust into a scenario where they must save a female soldier. And the cost of saving this soldier is the dreamer's own genitals, which are surgically removed and transplanted.
Yes.
And honestly, the most agonizing detail provided by the text is that this entire procedure is performed without anesthesia.
It's brutal. But before we delve into the procedure itself, we really must address the symbology here. The source text is unequivocal on this point. Within the framework of this specific analytical model, the genitals do not represent sexuality.
Okay, that's really important to highlight.
They do not represent libido or gender identity or anything like that.
So they are stepping completely outside of like a Freudian interpretation here.
Entirely. Freud is not at the wheel for this one. We are looking more toward a Jungian understanding or perhaps the concept of élan vital, the vital force. Right. In this context, the generative organs symbolize the core life force, personal dignity, and the innate capacity to project power and efficacy into the world. They represent the fundamental energy required to exist as an autonomous individual.
So by sacrificing them, the dreamer is quite literally giving away the very essence of their vitality to sustain someone else.
Exactly.
And the detail of undergoing the extraction without anesthesia, I mean, that fundamentally changes the nature of the act, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, if you are anesthetized, you are a passive victim of a procedure. You wake up and it's done. But being fully conscious, feeling every agonizing moment of the extraction, that symbolizes a hyper-aware, excruciatingly conscious martyrdom.
That's incredibly well put.
You are wide awake to your own depletion. You are actively choosing to endure the agony of tearing yourself apart for the sake of another.
And the psychology of conscious martyrdom is deeply, deeply tied to burnout. In waking life, this translates to the individual who knows that taking on another project or absorbing another family crisis will completely destroy their mental health.
But they do it anyway.
They do it anyway, feeling the psychic pain every step of the way. But the tragedy of the simulation lies in the aftermath. The dreamer's sacrifice parts are replaced, but with the genitals of a horse.
And it is a catastrophic failure of a transplant. The source describes the botched horse part in this really haunting detail. It is only attached at the tip. It feels incredibly alien and creepy to the dreamer.
Yes, the text is very specific about that creepiness.
It is heavy, it's stuffed with unrecognizable organs, and most devastatingly, it possesses absolutely zero functionality.
The introduction of the botched horse anatomy represents a profound, crippling loss of efficacy in the waking world. The dreamer has surrendered their true power, their authentic life force.
Right.
And the replacement they are forced to carry leaves them feeling fundamentally broken. It is the physical embodiment of imposter syndrome and deep-seated anxiety.
Like, am I doing this right? Am I competent?
Exactly. I have sacrificed my well-being, and now I am weighed down by a mechanism I do not understand and I cannot operate.
The mythological contrast the text draws here is really what elevates the analysis for me. Because the dreamer didn't originally seek out a horse part. They sought a legendary mythical substance called deer liquid for healing, but were given the horse part instead.
Yes. And the dichotomy between the deer and the horse is a classic archetypal juxtaposition. The deer liquid functions as an elixir of life. In many mythologies, the deer, with its antlers that fall and regenerate, it symbolizes pure, holy healing.
It's spiritual renewal.
Exactly. It's the perfect panacea.
It's the magic bullet. When we are completely burned out, our waking minds desperately construct the fantasy of the deer liquid. We convince ourselves, like, if I can just get through this week, if I can just book that one vacation to the mountains, if I just get that one promotion,
then everything will be fixed.
Right. All of this psychic damage will be instantly and cleanly regenerated.
But the brain grasps for the majestic, perfect solution because the internal damage is so vast. Reality, however, rarely dispenses the elixir. Reality, as represented by the simulation, dispenses the horse.
The heavy horse.
And critically, the horse, in this symbolic context, is not the majestic, wild stallion running free in a meadow. It is the beast of burden. It is the industrial, subjugated workhorse.
The heavy, clumsy, inadequate solution that we are forced to stitch onto our wounds just to keep plodding along. I mean, the tragic gap between the ethereal, healing deer and the botched, heavy horse. It perfectly captures the dissonance between what our souls require to heal and the misaligned, inadequate coping mechanisms we actually employ.
It really does. The dreamer goes to the hospital of the unconscious seeking spiritual regeneration and is handed a rusty, heavy piece of industrial machinery that doesn't even work, and it's stitched onto them while they are fully conscious.
It is the ultimate degradation of personal power.
It is.
Yet even in the depths of this somatic horror, the brain's simulation protocol does not entirely abandon the dreamer to despair, which is fascinating. The narrative shifts, introducing a sudden, jarring glimmer of competence, which is immediately counterbalanced by a stark representation of profound unfairness.
Yes, we move from the surgical trauma to a sequence involving distinct interpersonal interactions.
Right. Following the botched surgery, the dreamer encounters an ally, and the specific identity of this ally is crucial to understanding the brain's internal database of resources.
It is. The ally is a real-life visiting caregiver, a woman who, in the waking world, professionally cared for the dreamer's grandmother.
Which is such a specific pull from memory.
It is, and she arrives in the dream reality armed with what the text calls high-tech glue. She expertly applies this glue, successfully fixing the connection to the transplant, which miraculously allows the female soldier, the recipient of the dreamer's original sacrifice, to stand up and walk.
Wow. So the appearance of the caregiver, the analysis notes this is a fascinating application of what psychologists call object relations theory.
Yes, the brain is searching its memory banks for a secure base, a representation of genuine competence, care, and reliability. By summoning a real-world figure associated with professional caregiving, the unconscious mind reveals that it has not completely surrendered to nihilism.
The brain still fundamentally believes that genuine effective help exists in the universe. The high-tech glue isn't magic like the deer liquid.
No, it's practical.
Exactly. It's a practical, modern, effective intervention applied by a competent professional.
It represents the belief that if the right external resources are applied, the horrific damage can at least be mitigated. The sacrifice can be validated by the success of the soldier walking.
Right. But the relief provided by the caregiver is immediately shattered by the appearance of the second interpersonal figure. The scene abruptly shifts to an area designated as Miane's Mansion Plaza, where a chaotic argument breaks out.
Yes, the brother arrives.
The dreamer's brother appears, accompanied by a partner, and they aren't there to help. They are actively looting valuables from the plaza. And as the brother is stealing, he screams at the dreamer, "You had 10 minutes of a good time. We are the ones suffering."
Dream analysis regarding family members always requires careful navigation. The source text clarifies that the appearance of the brother is almost certainly not about the waking life sibling.
So it's not actually about a fight with a brother.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
In these high-stakes threat simulations, family members act as avatars. They are projections of internal archetypes or manifestations of complex emotional dynamics.
So the brother is acting as the archetype of the parasite, or what Jung might call the shadow aspect of unacknowledged resentment.
He symbolizes the crushing waking reality of the theft of validation. Consider the dreamer's journey so far. They have lost their sanctuary, endured a localized cultural invasion, sacrificed their vital life force without anesthesia, and are burdened with a botched alien appendage.
They have paid the ultimate price.
Exactly. The brother figure represents the external forces in waking life that not only refuse to acknowledge that immense sacrifice, but actively swoop in to loot the rewards while simultaneously claiming the mantle of victimhood.
The psychological violence of that statement, "we are the ones suffering," is just staggering. To contextualize this in waking life, it goes far beyond the cliche of a lazy coworker on a group project.
It's much deeper than that.
Right. It is akin to spending a decade meticulously restoring a masterpiece painting, pouring your eyesight, your time, and your absolute soul into the canvas.
Right.
Then, just as the final layer of varnish dries, a gallery owner steps in, signs their name right over yours, takes the multi-million-dollar commission, and then complains to the press about how exhausted they are from the paint fumes.
That is a brilliant analogy. It is the complete hijacking of your ontological output and your emotional labor.
It is the systemic denial of your reality. The brain is simulating the extreme distress of invisible labor. The dreamer is carrying the weight of the world, fixing the crises behind the scenes, yet the environment rewards the loud, the parasitic, and the aggressively entitled.
The brothers' shouts in the plaza are the auditory hallucination of extreme waking injustice.
Which sets the stage for the climax of the simulation, because despite the horror, despite the looting, the dreamer did actually succeed in their primary mission.
Yes.
The high-tech glue held. The female soldier, the recipient of the vital force, is saved and capable of walking.
The narrative tension demands a resolution here. The sacrifice has borne fruit.
You would expect the cinematic language of the dream to reflect that triumph. You know, the hero, battered and diminished, watches the soldier march toward the horizon.
A happy ending.
Right. But the threat simulation has one final devastating variable to test. The dreamer turns to look back at the people they have just saved. And instead of gratitude, instead of hero's farewell, the dreamer sees the female soldier and the others raising bows.
Yes.
They unleash a massive torrential rain of tiny arrows directly at the dreamer's back. The dreamer is forced to turn and sprint for their life, waking up in a state of physical panic, heart pounding, adrenaline flooding their system.
This sequence represents the absolute nucleus of the threat simulation. The analysis identifies this dynamic as the unrewarded martyr complex taken to its absolute most toxic extreme.
Wow.
It is the purest manifestation of a devastating waking reality where the individual's brain is just screaming, "I have immolated myself to keep you warm, and you are using the fire to forge weapons against me."
It is the ultimate betrayal. But the neurological translation of the imagery hinges on one highly specific adjective, because the text is very careful to emphasize that the arrows raining down are tiny.
Yes, the size of the projectiles is the key to diagnosing the exact nature of the waking trauma.
Explain that.
Well, if the brain were simulating a single catastrophic life event, say a sudden termination from a career, the death of a loved one, a violent divorce, it would manifest as a massive boulder or a missile or a tidal wave. A macro trauma demands a macro symbol.
A giant cannonball.
Exactly. But the threat here is an endless rain of tiny arrows.
Which perfectly maps onto the biological reality of allostatic load and chronic stress. The dreamer is not facing a single lion in the savannah. They're facing 1,000 mosquito bites.
Yes.
The tiny arrows represent the daily accumulation of microaggressions, the passive-aggressive emails, the subtle undermining by colleagues, the ungrateful dismissals from family members, the constant friction-filled grind of societal expectations.
The arrows are the visual metaphor for a continuous cortisol drip. One tiny arrow hitting you in the back is an annoyance. It stings, but it doesn't kill you. You pull it out and keep walking.
Right.
But a torrential rain of them, striking you relentlessly in the back while you are already depleted from the botched surgery, while you are fleeing your ruined home. That is what induces total psychological collapse. It is death by 1,000 paper cuts.
The neurobiology of this is fascinating. The brain processes chronic, low-grade stress as an inflammatory response. Over time, the constant barrage of minor social and emotional frictions actually degrades the hippocampus and hypertrophies the amygdala.
Yes, it rewires the brain.
The brain literally becomes hypersensitive to threat. The dream of running from 1,000 tiny arrows is the most accurate possible visualization of a nervous system that has been compromised by chronic, inescapable environmental friction.
When we synthesize the entire arc of this nocturnal simulation, the architecture of the tragedy is mathematically precise. The unconscious mind has constructed a flawless allegory for systemic burnout.
Let's trace the trajectory of the descent, just to summarize.
Okay.
You begin with a compromised psychological foundation, the dilapidated house. The fragile boundary of the ego is violently overwritten by an invasive, atmosphere-altering force, the kimchi production.
Right.
In a desperate bid to reclaim efficacy, you sacrifice your core life force, fully conscious of the agony, the extraction without anesthesia. You are burdened with an inadequate, alien coping mechanism, the botched workhorse appendage.
Yes.
You witness parasitic forces steal the validation of your sacrifice, the looting brother. And finally, when you seek the meager comfort of knowing your sacrifice saved someone, you are chased into the dark by a relentless barrage of stinging micro-betrayals from the very people you bled for.
The dreamer is completely, thoroughly hollowed out. They are giving entirely too much of their vital energy to an environment that operates strictly on extraction, offering absolutely zero reciprocity or sanctuary.
As we conclude this deep dive, it is genuinely awe-inspiring to recognize the storytelling power of the unconscious mind. I mean, this is not a random firing of neurons. It is a masterclass in psychological visualization.
It really is.
But the absolute most crucial takeaway from our source material is the reality of the aftermath.
The specific imagery, the horse parts, the fermented cabbage, the showers of arrows, is hallucinatory. But the physiological and emotional responses are grounded in absolute biological reality.
They are real.
Yes. The exhaustion, the terror of boundary collapse, the deep burning anger at the injustice of stolen validation. Those feelings upon waking are 100% real.
The simulation has ended, but the dashboard warning lights are flashing red.
A threat simulation of this magnitude is not a punishment. It is an intervention. It is the brain utilizing the only language it has, symbolic terror, to force the conscious mind to audit its waking life.
Right.
It is demanding that the individual locate the real-world equivalents of the ruined house and the ungrateful archers and establish immediate, non-negotiable boundaries.
We've spent this time analyzing the intense cinematic warning system of someone else's mind. But the projector in your mind is wired to the exact same evolutionary hardware.
That's a sobering thought.
If your unconscious mind had to direct a blockbuster movie tonight, specifically designed to visualize the massive systemic stressors that you were desperately trying to ignore during the day, what would your simulation look like?
What terrifying, bizarre symbols would your brain deploy to finally get your attention?
Exactly. And perhaps the more urgent question to ask yourself tomorrow morning is this: do you really need to wait for the torrential rain of arrows to start before you finally decide to build a reinforced lock for your own door?